Łukasz never knew what made him glance in his rear monitor. Maybe it was that first exercise back on Matar where his lance had been decimated by the surprise attack from the rear. Or maybe his ancestors were looking out for him. Whatever it was good fortune. Łukasz looked down and saw the massive domed head of a crocket pushing its way up and out of the water. Ambush. The crocket was a tough mech, an 85-ton monster bristling with large and small lasers, SRMs, and a Blankenberg LB-10X autocannon. On top of that, its jump jets gave it unusual mobility for a heavy mech. Just the kind of asset the Davions needed to smash Łukasz' fledgling attack. He couldn't let the crocket come ashore. Echoes of Disgrace, page 17, by Stephen Mohan, Jr. If BattleTech was a mobster movie, the Star League would be the quote-unquote good times that the main character looks back on with those rose-tinted glasses. The reality, as we know, is much more nuanced, and not everyone benefited from the Star League in equal measure. Of course, for those within the system and the industries that supplied that system, things were pretty good. A notable example of just how good it was for the lucky few were the men and women of the Star League Defense Force. It was by far the largest military organization in human history, able to field regiments so well equipped that it would make the military dictatorships of old Terra froth with jealousy. Legions of soldiers, tanks, and battle mechs could and were eventually brought to bear on the enemies of the Star League, and sometimes just small periphery nations that looked like they needed a good pummeling. I bring this up because the story of the noble Crockett begins within the bureaucracy of the Star League's military recruiting system. With more than 200 military academies scattered across the inner sphere and recruitment efforts which touched almost all settled planets, the SLDF was a machine that ran on recruits and an increasingly professional training regimen. Prospective members of the SLDF underwent physical and mental evaluations, including personality profiling, to affirm they had a compatible moral character. This was deemed necessary because many people saw volunteering for SLDF service as a ticket away from their home planets where they might be fleeing the consequences of their own behavior. It should be noted that the House Lords complained about the SLDF recruiting because political dissidents would use it to help escape punishment from the states. Should we name names, or can you guess which ones were the most vocal about that? Let's just say that one really likes dragons and the other one has leaders that behave like they're on an all-lead and mercury diet. Any claims that I went off on that tangent just so I could make that joke are completely unfounded. Now, where was I? Yes. While most recruits were not destined for the cockpits of battle mechs, those who were identified as having particularly useful talents and intelligence could find themselves at any number of academies devoted to training mech warriors. While there were many scattered throughout the inner sphere, the most prestigious and hardest to enter were found within the Terran system. Within that educational framework, classroom learning and training simulators were useful up to a point. Eventually, aspiring mech warriors would need to crawl into a cockpit and gain some real-world experience. Somewhere along the line in the early 28th century, an SLDF decision-maker had the idea to create a battle mech explicitly for training mech warriors who would eventually be assigned to an assault-class mech. The proper ears were nabbed, drinks were ordered, hands shook, documents signed, and the Terran-based Blankenberg Technologies was awarded the contract. The resulting 85-ton battle mech was eventually tagged the Crocket, a deliberate reference to the 19th century outdoorsman, adventurer, and statesman who was still known for his tenaciousness and fighting skills in the 28th century. Many people don't know this, but Crockett spent years in public service, often fighting for the rights of small rural landowners in Tennessee who were continually being hit with obtuse taxes and government regulations in the first few decades of the 19th century. Good on you, Davy. Don't let them hide your legacy in the basement of the Alamo. With clear instructions to create a balanced 85-ton assault mech that could be a dedicated trainer, Blankenberg's design team got to work. The end result was surprisingly useful. Constructed from a geometric 530 hardcore chassis wrapped around a Strand 255D fusion engine, the CRK 5003-1 Crocket was built tough but sacrificed a bit in the speed department in favor of armor and weaponry. Opportunity cost spares no one, remember? The 54 km/h top speed wasn't too egregious, though in comparison to its peers in the 85-ton bracket, it's a little slow. Thankfully, that limitation was partially mitigated through the addition of Geotech 300 jump jets, which allowed the Crocket to leap up to 90 meters on plumes of plasmic fire and optimism. The 353 movement profile was a crucial component of what made the Crocket so successful. Of course, no mech would last long without armor, so 16.5 tons of carbon strand 30 weight AS standard plate armor was added to the Crocket, providing 264 points of protection. This maxed out the possible protection on the Crocket. For comparison, the Battlemaster 1G, introduced in 2633, carried 14.5 tons of standard plate. With 6 tons of gyro and cockpit installed and 15 fancy new double heat sinks, that left a glorious 30 tons of mass for additional weapons, ammunition, and equipment. That's roughly 35% of the mech's total mass. At this point in the timeline, advanced technology on Terra was relatively plentiful, especially so for Blankenberg, which manufactured the 2 ER large lasers which were split between the Crocket's arms. Doing one better, they also added their own in-house Blankenberg LB-10X autocannon to the Crocket's left side, fed by 3 tons of ammunition, split 2 in the right torso and 1 in the left. That's a nice 1-2-3 punch, and we haven't even gotten to the short-range stuff yet. Starting at 9 hexes, 2 short-range missile 6-packs set high up on the side torsos offered a possible 24 points of missile damage for anyone who wandered too close to the dangerous end of this battle mech. Each launcher could feed from 2 tons of ammunition stored in the right torso. Finally, should other conflict resolution and rapid de-escalation strategies fail, a pair of small lasers split between the arms could offer their modest 3 damage out to 3 hexes. Overall, the Crocket 5003-1 fit the bill for a dangerous at all ranges assault mech. The 2 ER large lasers and LB-10X could be fired while on the run without running the heat into the red, and it could even leap the full jump jet distance without heat issues. At close range, heat management would be necessary once the SRM-6s came into play, though it wouldn't be difficult to drop an ER large laser shot here and there to get things back to zero. The biggest flaw in the design was also an issue not really considered one for a mech that was intended as a trainer. The 5 tons of ammunition stored in the side torsos represented an always-present threat for any Crocket taken into battle. Short of dumping ammunition on purpose, the prospect of ridding yourself of 30 shots of SRM-6 ammunition and 30 shots of autocannon rounds before things got hairy was pretty remote. Obviously, in a training environment, there's lower risk, and it's nice to have plenty of ammunition available without having to stop for continual resupply. One other issue was quickly identified once reports came in describing failures in the BattleMech's life support systems through normal wear and tear. Apparently, 3 Mechwarriors died in combat directly related to these failures before a recall could go out for refit. After that fix, there weren't any more reports of this specific system failing in combat. I'm not sure if it's fair that that trait lingers on the mech down the timeline, but it is what it is. At the apogee of his jump, the Enforcer's computer tagged several more mechs fighting a few streets over on the Academy grinder. Serving as a parade ground and staging area, the grinder was a large ferrocrete slab of paved ground, a half-kilometer wide and nearly twice as long. Arthur dropped in on its far side to pin the Crocket between himself and the Night Star. The Enforcer's alarms shrilled as the Crocket twisted to fire its weapons at both him and the Night Star. The Crocket was painted a flat black, showing no emblem but House Kurita's styled dragon coiling against a red disc. What the mech lacked in decoration, it made up for in offensive capability. Its paired large and small lasers, twin short-range missile packs, and medium-class autocannon quickly dealt out plenty of damage. Patriots and Tyrants, page 87, by Lauren L. Coleman. Reception for the Crocket at the Star League Academies was positive, and those first limited production runs of the mech were distributed with hopes of generating feedback and fixing any lingering bugs. Over the next decade, the Crocket became the first assault mech for many aspiring mechwarriors who sought to dominate the modern battlefield. Reports to Blankenberg included commentary on the Crocket's ease of handling over time, ease of repair, and when exposed to real combat, it was said that, quote, some of the mech's unique capabilities made it unpredictable to the enemy. I'd infer that comes from the inclusion of the jump jets and the differentiated loadout. It's interesting, but the original 2750 technical readout, Fluff, suggests that one of the reasons that the Crocket made the transition from training mech to battlefield monster was that it sacrificed some of its armor protection in favor of heat sinks and weapons. It's a curious little hiccup, as we previously mentioned that the Crocket has maxed out standard armor. Oops. Moving on. Because the Crocket was deliberately designed for ease of learning and maintenance, it was popular beyond the training academies. As more and more production runs were shipped out, the Crocket joined the ranks of regular SLDF units. The proprietary ER large lasers were very popular as they were able to hit targets in precious seconds before the targets could fire back. In fact, this was the primary tactic of many Crocket pilots who sought to pummel a target into charging, only to employ the jump jets to leap over the frustrated enemy and create a scenario where the target could turn to face the Crocket and expose itself to fire from others, or ignore the Crocket and experience 2 SRM-6 shots from behind. Tough call. Unfortunately, the combination of limited numbers along with their usefulness in a fight led to a serious decline in the number of Crockets spotted in the wild. With Comstar locking up Terra and the Succession Wars kicking off, it wasn't long until this popular battle mech saw extinction. What bits and pieces remained clogged up warehouses for some imagined day when it could once again terrorize the battlefields of the Inner Sphere. The Crockets on Terra were shuffled away by Comstar and were forgotten by the rest of the Inner Sphere until the existence of the Comguard was announced shortly before the Battle of Tukayyid in 3052. Of course, that's what the surface level history reads. Before we talk about the shenanigans of the 3030s, we do need to cover the Succession Wars downgrade. Before the Crocket became extinct, temporarily, there were attempts to keep the mech running with some downgraded tech. For the CRK 5030, which has an introduction date of 2881, many of the fancy bits that helped the Crocket be a menace toward others saw the chopping block. The first change was the downgrade of the ER large lasers to their standard versions. This was probably a good thing because the 15 double heatsinks had to be sacrificed as well, leaving only 15 of the single variety. Finally, the LB-10X autocannon was replaced by a standard AC-10 with just 2 tons of ammunition instead of 3. Obviously, these changes drastically cut back on the flexibility and offensive power of the battlemech. It's not horrid as far as Succession Wars downgrades go, but you definitely miss those 15 double heatsinks. Ouch. Star Captain Cade Corbett squeezed his primary trigger, sending a slug of ferrous nickel-iron alloy downrange. Half a heartbeat later, it collided with the right torso of a Crocket already badly damaged from several minutes of heavy combat. Its remaining armor plates barely showed the Gauss slug, which ricocheted off a foamed aluminum rib bone and expended the last of its kinetic energy, penetrating the Crocket's LB-10X ammunition bin. A fiery explosion obliterated the top half of the mech and sent a lethal cloud of fragments into a nearby infantry platoon. Lessons of War, Tukayyid 3rd edition, page 5, by Joel Steverson. Before the arrival of the clans and the emergence of the Comguard, Comstar's acolytes were busy playing master manipulators in the complicated games of Inner Sphere house politics. When one of the great houses or another threatened the careful balance of power, surprise, surprise, Comstar had a tendency to show up and put their fingers on the scale. While this sometimes took the form of sharing valuable intelligence or threatening to cut off access to the hyperpulse generator system, other times it required more creative and direct action. The Crocket re-enters our story and timeline in 3035 when Primus Mindo Waterley decided that the balance of power between the houses was increasingly lopsided toward the Lyrans and Davions. Contacting then Conray Theodore Kurita, a gift of a new Blankenberg Technologies production line for a curiously familiar 85-ton battlemech design offered the DCMS a much-needed boost. Though the mech was named the Katana, it looked and functioned as roughly the same battlemech as the long-extinct Crocket. The entire endeavor was so sneaky that the Katanas produced on Sol still used the Crocket's designation of CRK 5003. The 5003-2 Katana was a half-step forward in technology from the Succession Wars downgrade of the Crocket, approaching but not quite reaching the mech's Star League glory. The Katana's 353 movement was preserved, but the mech's 20 single heatsinks were paid for with a reduction in firepower and a drop in armor to just 12.5 tons of standard plate. The weapons loadout for the Katana reflects the half-step with the return of the LB-10X autocannon with 2 tons of ammunition in the right torso. The side torso SRM-6 launchers and arm-mounted small lasers also made their return. The holdovers from the downgrade were the twin standard large lasers split between the arms. While definitely a more powerful mech than the Crocket 5003, the loss of the 4 tons of armor made for a considerably more delicate battlemech. The 20 double heat sinks made it much easier to hammer targets while on the run with both large lasers and even the SRMs, which is probably why the DCMS loved it. Naming it the Katana really didn't hurt either. The Katana went into full production, and reports suggest it performed very well during the War of 3039. This helped dilute the complaints that the mech couldn't match the technology of the original Crocket, and Comstar was confident that their half-step was enough to achieve political goals without giving up too much Star League technology to the Combine. Of course, all of this was done just before the discovery of the Helm Memory Core, which let the technology squirrels out of the bag. Oops. We're going to have to follow the timeline here for a series of variants that cover both the Crocket proper and the Katana, though they have at this point diverged into separate evolutionary lines. We're going to skip over the 3050's CRK 5003C and the CM variants, as there's not a lot to see there except noting that they were tweaked to include the C3 computer systems. Don't worry, there's still plenty of C3 fun ahead of us. The CRK 5003-3 was a Comstar-produced upgrade to the Crocket in 3062, which brought it back to the original glory and then some. Almost everything about the design mirrored the original Star League Crocket, except for the loss of a half-ton of armor in order to free up the mass necessary for a right torso case to protect the 3 tons of LB-10X ammunition. That's one heck of a sentence. The 2 tons of SRM-6 ammunition were also moved to the right arm, which protects the Crocket's entire left side and center torso from any rapid, unplanned ammunition disassembly incidents. The sacrifices made for the case were easily justified by the added resilience. The Crocket 5003-3 approaches peak Crocket form. Let's see if we can do any better as we move forward. In 3063, a tweak to the 3 variant was carried out to install an improved C3 system into the battlemech. This was achieved through the downgrade of the 2 SRM-6 launchers to SRM-4s. Also, the traditional 2 small lasers were upgraded to the ER variety, and the 2 tons of SRM-4 ammunition were moved to the right torso. Overall, there isn't much to say about this tweak beyond knowing it exists if you're into the improved C3. These Comguard and Word of Blake mechs sure do love their C3s. Taking a short leap down the timeline to 3070, the CRK 5005-1 Crocket shows the first significant structural changes to the design. The 3.5 movement is maintained, but the engine was upgraded to the Lyran Light Fusion design to save 3 tons of mass. Additionally, the 3 jump jets were pulled in favor of 5 improved jump jets, which pushed the overall movement profile to 3.55. I'm liking where this is going. Armor is once again maxed out at 16.5 tons of standard plate, but 1 double heatsink was yanked, leaving the total at 14. The last structural change was the use of a small cockpit, which opened up 1 extra critical hit location in the mech's head. The weapons and equipment loadout for the 5005-1 Crocket looks familiar, with 2 ER large lasers split between the arms and the classic LB-10X autocannon in the left torso, fed by 2 tons of case-protected ammunition set into the right torso. An improved C3 computer was installed into the head-open criticals thanks to that small cockpit. The only significant change to the loadout was the removal of the traditional SRM launchers in favor of a pair of multi-missile 3 launchers. This modestly bolstered the Crocket's long-range firepower with up to 6 long-range missiles. While they weren't going to put up big numbers, every little bit helps, I suppose. You never know when an LRM is going to hit something squishy. At close range, the equivalent of 2 SRM-3 launchers are a step down in damage, but opportunity cost spares no one. Thankfully, you don't have to choose between SRMs or LRMs because 2 tons are dedicated to the launchers in that right torso protected by case. Overall, the 5005-1 Crocket is a solid machine that leans hard into agility, which I really like, but at the cost of a little short-range punch and slightly more vulnerable engine. The heat curve is generous and the mech is still formidable. I just love the idea of an 85-ton battle mech hopping 5 hexes at a time. If you have experience running this variant, please let me know how it does in the field. I suspect it's a riot. Just 1 year later, in 3071, the Katana evolutionary line saw its next variant in the form of the 5003 CJ. It ran the standard fusion engine, 15 double heatsinks, and carried the signature Katana's 12.5 tons of standard plate. Improved jump jets make their return, sticking with the new 3.55 movement profile. The weapons loadout takes a significant tangent, saying goodbye to the traditional large lasers in favor of the slightly less impactful light particle projection cannon split between the arms. The light PPC can fire out to 18 hexes for 5 damage, but at the cost of 5 heat per shot and a 3 hex minimum firing range. A plus for the build was a shared range profile with a traditional left torso-mounted LB-10X autocannon, this time without that minimum range. As expected, its 2 tons of ammunition were set into the right torso, though this time there's no case protection. Moving into short range, 2 ER medium lasers were split between the arms, and they offered their reliable 5 damage out to 12 hexes. Finally, 2 short-range missile 6-racks split between the side torsos add their potential 24 damage if the missile hit table gods smile upon you. Overall, the Katana 5003CJ is a solid upgrade, though a little squishier than I'd prefer with that lighter armor. The step down with the ER large lasers to the light PPCs hurts a bit, but this variant is much more of a mid and short range fighter from the looks of it. The 4 tons of ammunition in the right torso without case is a slight concern, especially since the critical 4-6 bracket has all 4 ammo boxes and just 1/2 of the SRM-6 launcher that could absorb any wayward critical. It's a 4 out of 5 chance after a 50-50, but in a more perfect world, that entire launcher could be shifted down to make it 4 out of 6 after the 50-50. But we might be going off into the weeds here. Our last official variant of the day was designated the 5006-1, and it once again is from the Katana line of battle mechs. It arrived in 3108, and for the first time since the outing with the light engine, the Crockett has benefited from a significant structural change, that being the use of endo steel. The 12.5 tons of standard plate armor isn't a shock at this point for the Katanas, though this variant still has some surprises. The 355 movement persisted thanks to the improved jump jets, and just 10 double heat sinks on the mech made it possible to cram in the endo steel criticals. The 5006-1's primary weapon was a standard Gauss rifle in the left torso, fed by 3 tons of ammunition in the right side. The rifle itself is protected by Case 2. Backing up the Gauss, starting at 18 hexes, 2 light PPCs were split between the arms, followed shortly by 2 ER medium lasers. Finally, 2 Streak SRM-6 racks were split between the side torsos and fed by 2 tons of Case 2 protected ammunition in the right torso. From the 10,000 foot level, the Katana 5006-1 keeps the feel of the original loadouts and changes just enough for its quality of life improvements. The Case 2 feels necessary, especially with that persistent 12.5 tons of standard plate armor. The improved jump jets are a treat, and the only real complaint I have about the design is the limited heat sinking that would make firing everything in the heat of the moment a serious gamble. A full alpha strike on the run would leave the 6-1 at 11 heat into the red, which is stacking negative effects territory. As far as late Dark Age and early Ilkline era mech variants go, this is a pretty solid one. The Dragon will be pleased. Now, before we wrap things up and mosey on out into the backyard to enjoy the warm, smoky air, I did take a crack at creating my own Crockett. After much reflection, several games of Dominion, and a shared sleeve of Oreos, I decided to go with a Light Fusion Engine 5005-1 variant as my base and built out from there. The totally non-canon and unofficial Crockett CRK 5005-2 MF shares basic structure with its inspiration, though it does carry 16 double heat sinks, which will come in handy later. The 16.5 tons of standard plate went untouched, and I converted the small cockpit back to the standard so we could get back a couple of those valuable cup holders and have enough space to put our feet up after a long day of melting faces. The weapons loadout has elements that are familiar to fans of the Crockett, though this time with a bit of Capellan razzle-dazzle in the form of twin plasma rifles split between the arms. Each weapon feeds from its own dedicated 2 tons of ammunition, which sit in the side torsos so that they could possibly soak up any wayward critical hits that might come in. Joining the fire at 12 hexes are a pair of ER medium lasers, and at 9 hexes and closer, 2 Streak SRM-6s sit in the side torsos and feed from a single ton of ammunition in the right torso. The 16 double heat sinks are enough to keep the 2MF heat neutral while on the run and firing the 2 plasma rifles and 2 ER medium lasers, but once the Streak SRM-6s are in range, you're playing with fire. Crack me up. Playing with fire. Got it. Total overall damage potential is on the lower end for an assault, but one has to factor in the possible 2d6 additional heat that the plasma rifles add to a target with heat sinks should they both hit on the same turn. That could seriously impact the opponent's heat curve strategy. The downside risks for the machine are the 2 light fusion criticals on each side torso and that unprotected ton of Streak SRM-6 ammunition in the right side. Though in the thick of it, with both Streak launchers hopefully putting in the work, those 15 shots could go quickly. On the tabletop, I think the Crockett 2MF would be quite a riot. I'm gonna have to give it a go next time I can slow Minifrog down enough from his summer romping and stomping to get a game in. If you want to give it a go, I've included a link to the PDF record sheet for the 2MF in the video notes below. So why do we love the Crocket? And Katana, I suppose. Well, it sure isn't because of its looks. The mech is a great example of how you can be goofy looking and still be useful and loved, just like so many of us. It's 85 tons of jumping thuggery and one of the few examples of battle mechs employing twin ER large lasers without serious issues. Its backstory as a training mech for the SLDF is a great way to shoehorn in some lore, and it makes a lot of sense that what started out as a dedicated trainer ended up being so beloved by officers that they wanted them in the ranks when the bullets started flying. I'm a sucker for a heavy or assault mech that has jump jets, and the Crocket has all the bits and pieces to contribute to a fight. Both the original Star League design and the latest in the timeline offers a good time if not full victory, and that's why we love it. So what do you think about the Crocket? Is it on your list of Star League must-haves, or do you overlook it since it looks a little bit like nature's cruelest joke? Let me know in the comments and we'll keep the conversation going. Big thanks to the MechFrog Discord server for always coming up with such well-painted models to share for the upcoming week's video. If you want to join us, I've added a link to the server down below. Come hang out with us for some BattleTech discussion, memes, and the occasional debate about why adding raisins to more foods will usher in the downfall of civilization. If you thought the video was worthwhile, please go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button. It lets YouTube know that you're an engaged viewer, and it's also a video worth sharing with others. You are also much more likely to see my nonsense in the future if you do. If you want to go one step further, supporting the channel through Ko-fi or becoming a YouTube channel member keeps the nonsense flowing. For all those who have already taken that step, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I really appreciate it. With that, I'll say have a great week, and please go out and make the world a slightly better place today and tomorrow.